So today's daf is daf Chav Gimel, and we're studying a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Yud Ches. The Torah says, "Ervas bas eshes avicha moledes avicha choscha hi." And the Chachamim understood that this was adding another iser to the case of achoso, if she's a full sister. But Rabbi Yossi Ben Yehuda is of the opinion that you only violate one iser. So the Gemara wants to know, what do we do with the pasuk according to Rabbi Yossi of Ervas Bas Eishes Avicha? And the Gemara answers, it's coming to exclude a case of achosu min hashivcha, or achosu min avodas kochav. That means where his father had a relationship with a shivcha or an avodas kochavim, and a daughter was born of that relationship. She's not your sister. The Gemara asks, "V'ema prat l'chai ve'lavim." Maybe Rabbi Yossi, you should allow another possibility, that the pasuk that's coming to exclude an illegitimate relationship, or the sister, the product, the bas from an illegitimate relationship between your father and his woman, who's the mother of this achos. So maybe that's a case of chayvei lavin. Like, let's say, for example, his father married a mamzeres, and from that relationship, a daughter was born, and she's not considered achoso. How do you know to exclude shivcha or avodas kochavim? Maybe we should exclude a case of chayvei lavin. Rav Papa answers, chayvei lavin tafsibu kedusha. I'm going to prove to you from another parsha, the parsha of Yerushas Bechar, that there is tfisas kedushin in the case of chayvei lav. And when the Torah excludes achoso, because it's not eshes aviv, meaning there's no ishus, the Torah could not possibly be excluding chayvei lavim, because in the case of chayvei lavim there is tfisas kedushin. Tichsiv, the Torah says in Parshas Ki Teitzei, Isiyena leish shtei nashim, hachas ahuva v'chas snua. So he has two wives, one he hates, the other he loves. Lo yuchal levaker ben ahuva al pnei hasnua ben hasnua. He cannot give the bechar, the chelik pishnayim, to the son of his beloved wife, at the exclusion of the son of his despised wife. So Rav Papa wants to darshan this pasuk, v'chiyesh ahuva lifnei hamokom v'shnua lifnei hamokom. Did the Torah have to talk about ahuva and snua? There's no one ahuva and snua. There's no snua lifnei hamokom. So you're not going to tell me that the Torah came lafuke, that maybe the Bechar would lose his Bechara because his mother is snua. Well, what does that mean? He should lose his Bechara, his pishnayim, because the father has a sinner, he harbors an enmity to his mother. Ella, but rather ahuva means ahuva b'nisu eha. The word ahuva is synonymous with nisuin. Nisuin is already the apex of the marriage relationship. Snua b'nisu eha. And snua means that hanisuin are hated in the eyes of God, meaning that there's some iser in that nisuin. And now we're talking about chayvei lavin. And Amar Achmona ki siyena leish. Siyena means havaya. Havaya means ishus and kedushin. So we see the kedushin that helps him, even if the kedushin are beisur, and therefore we conclude and formulate the principle of chayvei lavin tosim ba kedushin. So therefore you cannot derive from this pasuk that it's coming to exclude achoso from nisuei isur, and derive the conclusion that ain't kedushin tosim b'chayvei lavin. We see clearly from the parsha Bechar that kedushin are tofes b'chayvei lavin. V'ema prat l'chayvei krisus. Maybe the Torah is excluding under the law of achoso a girl who was born from a relationship of chayvei krisus. Amar Rava, you can't say that either. Omakra ervasachoscha bas avicho basimecha boledes bias o miledes chutz. The phrase moledes bias umoledes chutz is coming to teach you an expansion of the scope of the Isur. Bein sha'omrim lo lavicha kayem ubein sha'omrim lo lavicha hotzei. Whether or not they would tell your father, okay, stay married, this is a valid and legitimate nisuin, or they would tell your father, no, you've got to divorce your wife. That's called moledes chutz, chutz meaning send her away. And and nevertheless, the Torah says that she is your sister. So even though there's no ishus relationship between your father and the mother of this daughter of this achos, because it's a chayve krisus relationship, nevertheless, she still is included under the isur of achoso. The Amos says the Gemara, Bein sha'omer lo avicha kayem, Bein sha'omer lo avicha otzei, V'omer achman achoschi l'rabos achoso mishivcha v'omedes kochavim. Now that we have this ribui that includes under the Isur of achoso even a relationship between her father and her mother, which is prohibited, which is called michutz, meaning the rabos, a vicha hotzei situation, and you're telling me that that's referring to chayve krisus. Maybe it's referring to achos of yishivcha, achos of avodas kochavim, to be marba that she's also considered achoso, despite the fact that omrim lo lavicha hotzei. How do you know it's coming to exclude chayve krisus? When I say exclude, I mean excluding from the exclusion, which means to include it under chayve krisus, under the Isur of achoso. So the Gemara answers, Omakra bas eishes avicha mishe yeshlo ishus lavicha ba prat lachoso mishivcha ve'odas kochavim. When it says bas, the daughter of eishes avicha, it means that there's a relationship between your father and the mother of this achos. That has to exclude both shivcha and ovedes kochavim, because in those cases, that's not eishes avicha. There's no tfisas kedushin, neither in the case of shivcha nor in the case of ovedes kochavim. So the Gemara says umara isa, but wait a second. We just said that in the case where the father and the mother had a relationship of chayve krisus and ein kedushin tosin, nevertheless the daughter is called achoso, and that's going to be derived from the ribui of moledes chutz. Why you marbe chayve krisus from moledes chutz? Why not be marbe shivcha and avodas kochavim from moledes chutz? And the Gemara answers, mistabra chayve krisus havi leila rabos. It makes more sense to say that we're including achotzo mi chayve krisus. She came tafsi bei kiddushin be'alma. At least as far as this woman who is related to you b'chayve krisus, but she's included in ishus li'alma. It's only because of an isur kurva. However, in the case of nolda mi mishpacha mi shivcha mi avodas kochavim, that's someone, a woman, who is also on Klali, so has nothing to do with kurva. So the Gemara asks, Adarabba shivcha avodas kochavim havile l'rabos the I megaira l'didei nami tafsvei kedushin. In the case of a shivcha, there is a possibility that you could be makadesh her, and the kedusha would be valid if she underwent gerus. That's not true in the case of chayve krisus. Chayve krisus are forevermore. You could never ever create a kedushin that's tofes with chayve krisus. So the Gemara answers, l'chima gaira gufa achrinahi. You want to tell me that there is a possibility of having ishus with a goyita because she should be miskayeres? Come to me after she's a Giores. Until she's a Giores, there's nothing to talk about. She's excluded from Klal Yisrael. She's excluded from Tfisas Kiddush. After she undergoes Geras, that's called Gufa Achrina. That's Katan Shenolad Dami. That's a whole different personality, a new identity that was born. The Gemara asks Rabbana. Now we get back to the sheet of the Rabbana. is Limu'ute Shivcha Vedes Kochav Minole. After all, according to the Rabbanan, we use the pasuk of Ervas Eshes Avicha in order to add another Isur, Lavar Olav B'Shnei Isurim, and you'd have to bring two Shkagos in a case, two Chatos in a case of Shkaga. So now I don't have a pasuk to exclude Shivcha Vedes Kochavim. How do we know that the sister that was born to a relationship between your father and a non-Jewish woman, how do we know she's not your sister? Afkalan, we're going to derive it according to Chacham from Parshas Mishpatim, of all places. And we're talking about a Jewish man who was sold as an Eved Ivri, and his master married him off to a Shivcha, and they had children. And now it's time for him to go free from his avdus. Torah says he goes free alone, without his wife, without his children. You see that when the Eved Ivri, had a relationship with the Shivcha Knanis, there's no marriage over here. In fact, the children that are born from that relationship are not even miyuchas li'aviv. They go back to the Adon. The Gemara asks Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, why doesn't he use a miut of achoso to exclude the case of shivcha? And he could derive that from the pasuk isha v'yoladeha. And instead he had to exclude shivcha from the pasuk as eishes avicha. Why? Just derive it from a isha v'yoladeha, the same way the Chachamim did. And the Gemara says chad b'shivcha v'chad be'ovedes kochavim. I need one pasuk on each of Yoladeha to exclude a shivcha. I need another pasuk bas eishes avicha to exclude ovedes kochavim utzrichi, and I need both psukim. I can't derive one from the other. If the Torah said that there's no achos in the shivcha relationship, that would be mishum de'ein lo chayes. Her children are not miyuchasim achareha. That's the nature and the status of a shivcha. And this is based on a Gemara in Kiddushin that derives from Pasuk Bereishis, Perikav Beis, Shvulach, and Poem Achamot. Fine. So there's no chayes, no yichus. The children are not miyuchasim after the shivcha. That's why she's not considered achosa. A guy is miyuchas after its father. And Rashi derives this from a pasuk in Malachim Beis, Biladan ben Biladan, or Hadrimon ben Tavrimon. But there are many, many psukim that indicate that a guy is miyuchas liachar aviv, is emolo. Maybe there's no miyut in that case of ovedes kochavim. V'yashmin and ovedes kochavim. And if you would tell me that in the case of a non-Jewish woman, there's no ishus, and therefore the achos that's born is not called achoso, that's mishum d'lo shaycha b'mitzvahs. An akum has 6 mitzvahs, 7 mitzvahs. But Shivcha, Shaycha mitzvahs, she has many, many mitzvahs. She has the same identical number of mitzvahs as a woman, as a Jewish woman. Is Emo Lo, I would think there's no miut, is Tzricha. Now I need both psukim. Ula let's ask Ashkechan Shivcha, Ovedes Kochavim Minole. We derived according to Chachamim Shivcha from the pasuk Isha v'Yoladeha Sia Ladoneha. But what about Achosim and Avodas Kochavim? What's the source for that? That she's not considered Achos and there's no Chiv Erva. You can't derive it from Shivcha because Hahanach Mitzvah Tzricha. We've already proven that we need both of them. We can't derive both situations one from the other. Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I have another source. And this is the parasha of Meses in Dvarim Perek Zayin. And in that parasha, The Torah talks about intermarriage, that you shouldn't marry off your sons or your daughters to goyim. Bitcha lo sitein livno, ubito lo sikach lebanecha. So the Torah prohibits getting married to a non-Jewish woman, and a Jewish woman is prohibited for getting married to a non-Jewish man. Omakra ki asir es bincha me'acharai. If you're going to marry off your daughter to a non-Jewish man, then Yasir beno es bincha hanolad lehem v'nikra banech me'acharei Hashem. She, in effect, if you marry what's the case now? Ki Yasir es bincha, you're marrying a non-Jewish woman. Is that the case with Masechet Pasi es bitcha? Libno. Oh, he's talking about a case where he marries off his daughter to a non-Jew. Is Yasir beno es bincha noad lehem. So I guess beno here is referring to a non-Jewish man. He's the father of this child, and he's going to take that child away from service of Hashem. So the Torah is only giving a reason for the Isser of marrying off your daughter to a non-Jew. What about the opposite scenario? When you marry off your son to a non-Jewish woman, and Bito, this non-Jewish woman, is going to be Tasir es bincha, she'll take away your son from Acharei Hashem. So what do we prove from this? Bincha mi Yisraelis korui bincha. V'ein bincha ba min avodas kol chavim korui bincha el binah. So that if your son marries a non-Jewish woman, the Torah is not choshesh that the non-Jewish woman will take away your, I guess, your grandson from Derech Hashem, because he anyway has the status of an akum. So from this, the Chachamim derive the conclusion that just like a ben that comes from Avedas Kochavim is miyuchas to his mother, so too Achoso, whose bas aviv, shenoldu min ha'akum, eino mityacheses achrei aviv, shetei nechsheves achoso. So if a Jew has a relationship with a non-Jew, then the child is not Jewish. And therefore it cannot be achos. Where it adds from the fact that the Torah was concerned that the son of a guy would be Yasir es Nichdecha Miderech Hashem, is we're going to derive from this that Ben Bitcha Bam and Avodas Kol Chavim Kori Bincha. The Torah calls him Bincha, and it says Yasir is Bincha. Now we have Machlokes Tanom and Amoram that Akma Bal Bas Yisrael. We're going to have a whole sugi about this later on in Memhei. Ha'im Avlad Kosher or Vlad Mamzer. Lema, shall we say, Kasavar Avina Ove Kachov V'Eved Abal Bas Yisrael Avlad Kosher? Shall we pin down Ravina to that shita? So the Gemara rejects this. No, Nehida Mamzer Lohavi, Kosher Nami Lohavi, but rather Yisrael Pasul Mikri. So he's excluded from Kahuna. So the Gemara goes back to this derivation that achosim and avodas kolchavim is not considered achoso, is high. This pasuk Yosef bincha me'achorei Hashem, and we prove from there that ben bincha abam and avodas kolchavim and bincha is b'shiva umos ksive. The din of the Torah is dafka with regard to the 7 nations that occupied Palestine when the Klal Yisrael entered into Palestine. So how can you derive from this all other umos? Maybe it's only the Sheva umos. And you see the Torah was, with regard to Sheva umos, it was lo sechai called neshama. The Gemara answers, the pasuk says, ki yasir es bincha. Those are redundant 2 words. L'rabos kol hamesirim. Well, hamesirim means all the nations of the world, not just the 7 nations that occupied Palestine. The Gemara asks, nicha. We could say the ki yasir is marbe kol hamesirim. L'Rabbi Shimon the Darish time of the Kra el Rabbana Minole. According to Rabbi Shimon, since the words ki yasis bincha are redundant, because the Torah didn't have to give a tam, because we can be Darish time of the Kra, we would know Bisvara why the Torah says don't marry out of the faith, and therefore from that extra pasuk of ki yasir bincha, we're going to derive a ribuy of char ha'umus. El l'Rabbanan, but according to the Chachamim, they don't dash in Tami the Kra minolahu. How do we know that there's a ribuy for char umos? Maybe ki yasir is not superfluous, it's not redundant, because without adding the ki yasir, we would not be able to come up with our own svaras, and say that this is the underlying reason for the Isur. So the Torah had to write ki yasir lashmienu in order to teach us that this is the Tama Isur. Because lo darshin and time of the Kra, we would not on our own be able to derive the time of the Kra. And therefore, it's only Noeg Shiva Amamim, because they are totally dedicated to Avodah Zarah. It doesn't apply to other nations. So once again, the Gemara is still being mitakesh, that maybe this ki yasir bincha is a reference specifically to the 7 nations. So Gemara answers, man tana de polagale, de Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon he. We always had an anonymous Tana, faceless, unnamed Tana. We called it the Chachamim that disagree with Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and holds that Baal Achos is Chayiv Shtayim. And who is that unidentified anonymous Tana? It's Rabbi Shimon. Because Rabbi Shimon holds Darshinon time of the Kra. And he's going to darshan from ki yasir since it's superfluous.